Shift scheduling in OnTarget allows you to assign clients, employees, and shifts to specific sites. Eligible staff are then scheduled for designated shifts at each site, typically a group home or similar setting that requires 24/7 staff coverage. The schedules can be validated to ensure staffing requirements are met for the corresponding services and payers. Notes can be launched from the shift schedules, and each staff member associated to the shift can sign off on the note. Staff can pick up shifts or add themselves to shifts as needed, per appropriate security permissions. Staff can also be required to clock in and clock out of shifts for time and attendance purposes. This course will focus on the system security configuration that is required in order to leverage these feature sets. Let's start by going to Securities, found in the Configure desktop. We will focus on permissions in the Configure Roles menu. We are going to review several key menus that the users who will be responsible for configuring the system so that all sites and all shifts are set up and employees are linked to the sites in which they are eligible to work. These settings are typically only necessary for the managers or super users who will handle the system setup. Therefore, click on the corresponding role. Here, we're going to click on Residential Manager, since they will be the ones configuring the system before the direct care staff go live. All permissions are handled under the Desktop Security tab. The first screen to open up will be in the Employees section. Expand to see all options. You may choose to remove payroll-specific screens if these folks are not going to be managing payroll data. For shift scheduling, it is important that the users who will link employees to the sites in which they are eligible to work in have the Assigned Sites tab checked. Next, let's go to the Scheduling section and expand the items here. In terms of shift scheduling, you have two different options. You may check to either allow the shift scheduling of clients or to allow scheduling of employees, but you can also do both. In the event that different individuals manage when the clients will be in the home versus which staff will be covering the shifts, then you have the option to separate out the securities for the individual roles. Again, these checks are simply allowing managers, supervisors, or anyone that will be responsible for creating and managing these shift schedules, and whether or not they will be scheduling the clients to the homes and sites in which they will be served from, or the employees that will cover the shifts in those homes. Next, another key component of the initial setup is to designate which sites require staff to cover shifts. In this case, we need to grant access to the Sites desktop. It is most important that the Group Scheduling checkbox is enabled along with Edit Sites so that the corresponding users in this role can start designating which sites actually have shifts. There are two more critical configuration points. One is to specify which services require staffing in the common 24/7 shift cycle. Again, doesn't have to be 24/7, but that is the most common use case. To designate these services, expand Services, and then you can uncheck if the users in this role, let's say, don't need to delete services, they don't need to be modifying programs or revenue accounts, but their primary role here is that they need to designate which services will be utilized for this shift and site scheduling. So this is the critical checkbox when it comes to the shift scheduling setup. And the last critical step is to open up the menu that allows you to define your shifts. This can be done by going all the way to the bottom, expanding configure, further expanding list configuration so that you can get to scheduling and shifts. You'll see that just as in the other areas, to enable the checkbox here, you have to first check against the configure desktop. This will display the auto prompt. That is because the security section that houses the configure user screen is in the configure desktop. If the users in this role will not be handling securities at all, then you can simply choose no and come down to the security folder to uncheck that. That restricts these users from being able to get into any of the security screens. A very important distinction here. Uncheck any other folders in which the users may not need. In this case, the only screen the residential managers need in the scheduling folder is shifts. I only need them to configure the shifts for each of the sites, and therefore I'm going to disable all other menus. Likewise for the other folders. And now I will save. These are just the security settings that open the corresponding parts of the system so that you can begin customizing the various services and sites you'll want to schedule shifts for. There is one other security item to review, and that is how you turn on the access for your direct care staff. They typically will not be the ones entering in the schedules and configuring the system for this functionality, so their security settings are a bit easier since they are more limited in what they can do. You will most likely have a separate role for your direct care staff. In that event, choose that role and go to Desktop Security. The critical setting for these types of users is under the Scheduling desktop. So expand Scheduling and further expand the All Calendars Read-Only folder. This level of security makes it easy for them to see when they are supposed to work and what their supervisor's expectations are. You may choose to give them full rights to the calendar if they will be responsible for adding and updating their own schedules. However, the recommended rights are to leave them at read-only, and then provide some flexibility with their interaction on the scheduler by allowing them to pick up a shift in order to be able to fill in for another staff member and not rely on a supervisor to make the schedule change. Note, an important part of that workflow is that when the staff picks up another staff shift, the supervisor will get an automated task alerting them of the schedule change. Likewise, it is also recommended to allow them to add self to shift for continued flexibility. This allows them to be able to assign themselves to a shift, thereby adding an additional staff member to the shift for coverage purposes, as opposed to replacing another staff member in the pickup feature. The supervisor will also get an automatic task when this occurs, notifying them that the staff have added themselves to the shifts. Save these edits and continue learning about system configuration in the remainder of this course.